It was a gift from my grandmother, a doll that she had kept for years. I was only 10 when she gave it to me, and at the time I didn't think much of it. The doll was old, with dark brown glass eyes and a perfectly stitched porcelain face. Its body was made of worn cloth, and its dress was a faded pink. It looked like something straight out of a horror movie, and yet I accepted it with a smile, thanking her for the gift. I placed the doll on my dresser that night, admiring its intricate features, but as the night wore on, I started to feel uneasy. It wasn't that I was afraid of dolls, no, I loved them, but there was something about this one, something that made my skin crawl. I tried to dismiss it as my imagination getting the better of me, but as I lay in bed, I could feel my eyes drifting to the doll. It was as if it was staring back at me, its dark eyes glinting in the dim light of my room. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. I would leave the room for a few minutes, and when I returned, the doll's position would have changed. Sometimes it would be facing a different direction, or its arms would be shifted in a way that I hadn't left them. At first I thought it was just me being forgetful, but then it started to happen more frequently. And it wasn't just slight movements. Sometimes the doll's face would look like it had changed expression. A slight twitch of its lips, or a shift in the way its eyes seemed to glimmer, made me uncomfortable. One night I decided to test it. I positioned the doll in a specific way before going to bed, making sure everything was just as it should be. When I woke up the next morning, the doll was sitting up straight, its legs bent in a way that I had never placed them. Its head was tilted slightly, as if it was looking directly at me. That's when I realized something was wrong. But it wasn't, until a few weeks later, that I truly understood the gravity of the situation. I had gone out with friends one Saturday, and when I returned home I immediately noticed something odd. The door to my room was slightly ajar. I knew I had closed it before leaving. I hesitated, a sudden sense of dread crawling over me, and slowly walked inside. The doll was sitting on my bed, but that wasn't what scared me. It was the fact that it was holding something, a piece of paper that I hadn't seen before. It had been folded carefully and was tucked between its small hands. I opened it, my heart racing, and what I read made me freeze in place. "I'm watching you, always." My blood turned cold. I knew I hadn't written this, and I couldn't fathom how the doll had come to hold it. For the rest of the night I stayed in my room, afraid to leave, but every time I glanced over at the doll, it seemed to be looking back at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. That night, I dreamed of the doll. In the dream, it was moving on its own, slowly creeping across my room, its eyes glowing in the dark. I could hear its soft porcelain limbs scraping against the floor as it inched closer to me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The doll reached out its hand, and just as it was about to touch me, I woke up with a jolt, drenched in sweat. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I could hear whispers when I was alone in my room, soft, unintelligible voices that seemed to come from the direction of the doll. I didn't know if it was my mind playing tricks on me, but the fear I felt was too real to ignore. I begged my parents to get rid of the doll, but they didn't believe me. "It's just a doll, honey," my mum said. "It's not alive." But I knew better. I had no idea how, but I knew in my gut that something was off about it. That night, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I would leave the doll outside, far away from the house where it couldn't follow me. But when I went to get it, I found it wasn't where I had left it. In a panic, I searched my room, and finally I found it, in the closet, sitting on the top shelf, staring down at me. I couldn't explain how it had gotten there, but I knew I had to get rid of it. So I took it and threw it into the trash outside, hoping that would end it. The next day, when I came home from school, I found the doll back in my room. It was on my bed, as if it had never left. The paper it had once held was now missing, and the expression on its face was as calm as ever. That was the last straw. I didn't care anymore what my parents said. I packed the doll into a box and drove far away, deep into the woods, where no one would find it. I buried it in a hole, buried it deep under the earth, and hoped that was the end of it. To this day, I don't know how it got back into my room, but I've never seen it again. Every now and then, I'll hear a faint scratching noise late at night, like someone is tapping their nails on the window. And sometimes, when I look out into the woods near my home, I could swear I see something small standing just beyond the trees, watching me. I never believed in haunted objects until I came across the doll. It was a dusty old thing sitting on a shelf in the attic of my new house. The house was a fixer-upper, one of those charming old homes that had seen better days, but it had character. When we first moved in, I was excited about the new place, but something felt off about the attic. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the heavy, stale air, or the way the light never seemed to quite reach the far corners, but I avoided it as much as I could. One evening, while exploring the house, I ventured into the attic. As I searched through boxes filled with old furniture and forgotten mementos, my eyes landed on the doll. It was sitting in the corner, almost hidden beneath an old burlap sack. It was porcelain with a delicate face painted in rosy cheeks and red lips. Its dress was a pale blue, frayed and old, but still beautiful in its own way. The doll had long, blonde curls that cascaded down its back, and it was positioned perfectly, as though it had been waiting for someone to find it. I don't know why, but I felt a strange compulsion to take it. Maybe it was the way the doll's eyes seemed to gleam in the dim light, or maybe it was because I had always wanted a doll like that when I was a child. But I picked it up and brought it downstairs, setting it on the mantelpiece in the living room. That's when the weirdness started. The first night I heard strange noises. I couldn't explain them, but they were faint, scratching like someone lightly tapping the walls. I thought it was the house settling, but then the next night I heard it again. The tapping continued, but now it was followed by a soft whisper. It wasn't words, just hushed, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from every direction at once. I couldn't make out where they were coming from, but I felt them, like cold fingers brushing the back of my neck. I dismissed it. I had moved into an old house, after all. There were bound to be strange sounds, but then the doll started to move. It was subtle at first. I would leave the room for a while, and when I came back, the doll would be turned slightly, facing a different direction. It wasn't much, just a little turn of the head or a shift of its arms, but it was enough to make me uneasy. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that the doll couldn't possibly be moving on its own, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One evening after a long day at work, I came home to find the doll sitting at the edge of the mantelpiece looking directly at me. It hadn't been there before, I was sure of it. In fact, I distinctly remembered leaving it facing the wall. My stomach dropped. It was as though the doll had been waiting for me. I tried to laugh it off, thinking I might have knocked it earlier, without realizing it. But then the doll's eyes seemed to gleam brighter than before, and I felt a sudden, sharp chill in the air. It wasn't just the cold of the room. It was the feeling of being watched. The next night, I decided to do something about it. I took the doll off the mantel and set it on the table, away from where I usually kept it. I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the strange occurrences were all in my head. But when I woke up the next morning, I found the doll back on the mantel exactly where it had been before. And this time its face had changed. The smile had deepened as though it were mocking me. Its eyes were wider, more intense. I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped. I tried to leave the house for a few days, thinking that distance would help me clear my mind. But when I returned, I found the doll once again in its place, and the whispers started again. Only this time they were louder. They were words now. You should have left me alone. I didn't tell anyone about the doll. How could I? Who would believe me? I started to avoid the living room altogether. I kept the lights off when I went to bed, hoping the dark would somehow make the doll go away. But it didn't. If anything, it made things worse. One night, I woke up to the sound of heavy footsteps in the hall. The floorboards creaked under, the weight of someone or something walking towards my room. I lay frozen in bed, unable to move, unable to even scream. And then the door to my room slowly creaked open. I could hear the soft rustle of fabric, the sound of a small, delicate movement. The next thing I knew, the doll was standing at the foot of my bed. Its cold, lifeless eyes seemed to pierce through the darkness, watching me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, my body frozen with terror. I watched in horror as the doll took a slow step toward me, its porcelain feet making no sound on the floor. Just as it reached my bedside, the door slammed shut, and I woke up drenched in sweat, gasping for air. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could still feel the cold, lifeless eyes of the doll burning into me. I bolted upright, scanning the room. The doll was gone. That morning, I couldn't find the doll anywhere. I searched the house from top to bottom but couldn't locate it. I didn't want to know where it had gone. I just wanted it out of my life. I moved out a few days later, leaving everything behind, including the house. I never looked back. But sometimes when I'm alone in the dark, I feel that same icy chill creeping up my spine, and I wonder if the doll is still out there, waiting, watching, biding its time until it finds its next victim. It was a typical Saturday morning when I decided to tackle the clutter in our attic. My family had recently moved into an old Victorian house on the outskirts of town, and although I loved the character of the house, there was something about the attic that always made me uneasy. Perhaps it was the dust-covered beams or the thick, musty air, but whatever it was, I always felt like I was being watched when I ventured up there. Still, I figured it was time to sort through the boxes that had been left untouched for years. I climbed the creaky stairs, the old wooden planks groaning beneath me. The attic was large, filled with old furniture and forgotten mementos from previous owners. Most of the boxes contained clothing or random knickknacks, but as I rummaged through one particularly old chest, my fingers brushed against something, cold and hard. I pulled the object out and was met with the chilling sight of a small porcelain doll. It was beautifully crafted, though its face was cracked and worn. The doll's eyes were a dull, lifeless grey, and its black hair had been frizzed by age. Despite its delicate features, there was an eerie, unsettling aura surrounding it. Something about the way it seemed to stare at me made my skin crawl. I didn't want to keep the doll, but for reasons I still don't understand, I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. I wrapped it in an old cloth and set it down in the corner of the attic, away from the clutter. I thought I'd deal with it later, but I went back downstairs and tried to forget about it. The next night, the strange occurrences began. It started with noises in the night, soft scuttling like something was moving around in the attic. At first I thought it was just the house settling, but then one night I heard a loud thud. It was so jarring that I shot up in bed, my heart pounding. I didn't want to investigate, but curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way back up to the attic. The door was slightly ajar, and as I opened it, the beam of my flashlight landed on the doll. It was no longer in the corner where I had left it. Instead, it was sitting upright in the center of the room, its cracked face staring directly at me. I froze, my blood running cold. I hadn't moved it. My heart was pounding in my chest as I slowly walked toward it. As I reached for the doll, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. It felt as though the room was growing colder, as if something was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I picked the doll up, my hands trembling, and placed it back in the corner where I had found it earlier. But when I turned to leave, I heard a soft giggle, a low, childish giggle that echoed through the empty attic. My blood ran cold, and I didn't waste another second. I ran down the stairs and slammed the attic door shut behind me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing strange noises from the attic, scratching sounds like something was trying to claw its way out. I tried to ignore it, but the more I tried to dismiss it, the louder the sounds grew. It was as though the house was alive, breathing, moving with every creak and groan. And at the heart of it all was the doll. I couldn't shake the feeling that the doll was calling me. The next day I went back to the attic, determined to get rid of the doll for good. I grabbed it by the arm and was about to throw it in the trash when I felt a sudden sharp tug on my sleeve. My body froze, and I looked over my shoulder to see nothing there. My heart was pounding, but I couldn't move. And then, without warning, the doll fell from my hands, landing with a loud crash on the floor. I was about to pick it up again when I noticed something strange. There were fresh fingerprints on the doll's porcelain face, fingerprints that hadn't been there before. They were smudged, as though the doll had been touched recently, but I was certain I hadn't touched it. In that moment, I knew that something wasn't right. I couldn't explain it, but the doll was no longer just an object. It was alive, watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. That night, the events took a darker turn. As I was lying in bed, I heard a faint whisper, so soft that I could barely make out the words. It seemed to be coming from the attic. I tried to ignore it, but the whisper grew louder, and then the words became clear. "Come play with me." I couldn't breathe. My heart was racing, and my hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone. I couldn't bring myself to go back to the attic, but I had to know what was happening. I dialed a friend and begged them to come over, explaining everything that had been going on. They arrived shortly, and together we went up to the attic. We stood there in the dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of my phone. The doll was still in the same spot, but as we approached, we noticed something chilling. The floor around it was covered in small, muddy footprints that led right up to the doll. They weren't mine, and they weren't from anyone. I knew. The whispers started again, louder this time, more insistent. "Play with me." My friend reached out to grab the doll, but as their fingers brushed against it, the attic door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The air grew thick and suffocating, and the temperature dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath. The doll's eyes seemed to glow, its lips curling into a sinister grin. The room felt alive with malevolent energy, and the whispers grew, louder until they were almost deafening. It was as though the very walls were closing in on us. We managed to escape, but I never went back to that house again. I couldn't shake the feeling that the doll had followed me, that it had been waiting for the right moment to strike. Even now, years later, I sometimes hear the faintest whisper when I'm alone. "Come play with me, play with me." It started as a simple visit to my grandmother's house, a place I had always found comforting and full of old memories. Her house was a cozy, albeit slightly outdated, two-story home. It was filled with the aroma of her cooking, the sound of her laughter, and the warmth of her presence. But there was one part of the house that always unsettled me: the basement. As a child, I was forbidden from going down there. It was cold, dark, and had a smell of must and decay that permeated the air. My grandmother would always tell me that there was nothing to see in the basement, and I never questioned it. However, as I grew older, my curiosity began to get the better of me. One summer, when I was visiting my grandmother during a break from school, I found myself wandering down the stairs into the basement. The heavy wooden door creaked as I pushed it open, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I stepped inside. The basement was dimly lit by a single overhead light, and the walls were lined with shelves filled with old boxes and forgotten items. I was about to turn back when something on a shelf caught my eye. The doll. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. The doll was perched on a small wooden chair, facing forward with its glassy, unblinking eyes. Its face was painted in an almost grotesque way, with a wide, unnaturally sweet smile, and its hair was wild, frizzy, and covered in dust. The clothing was old-fashioned, an old dress and bonnet stained with age. I hesitated. There was something about the doll that made me feel uneasy, but I couldn't put my finger on why. I slowly approached the shelf, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached out and touched the doll's shoulder. To my surprise, it was warm to the touch, as if it had been recently handled. Suddenly, I heard a creaking sound from behind me. I whipped around, heart in my throat, but there was nothing there. Just the shelves, the boxes, and the shadows that seemed to stretch longer in the dim light. I quickly turned back to the doll, but when I looked at it again, it had moved. Not much, just slightly, but enough to be noticeable. Its head was tilted as if it were looking at me. I froze, a chill running down my spine. I had definitely not moved it. Panic crept in. I backed away from the doll, but before I could turn to leave, I heard a soft giggle, a childlike, innocent giggle, coming from the far corner of the basement. My blood ran cold. I could feel the temperature drop, and I instinctively glanced back at the doll. It was no longer sitting still. The doll had turned its head completely, and now its eyes were fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. I couldn't move. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor. The giggling continued, louder this time, followed by a whisper that made my skin crawl. "Come play with me." Without thinking, I bolted out of the basement, slamming the door behind me. I was shaking as I stood in the hallway, trying to collect myself. My grandmother was in the kitchen, unaware of what had just happened. I couldn't bring myself to tell her. I wasn't sure if she would believe me. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear that soft giggle and the whisper, "Come play with me." It felt like the words were seeping into my thoughts, digging deeper, with every passing second. The next day, I told my grandmother I was leaving early, making up an excuse. I didn't want to stay in the house anymore. I didn't want to be anywhere near that basement, near that doll. But as I was packing my things, I noticed something strange. My grandmother's face had gone pale. She was holding something in her hand. It was the doll, the same doll I had seen in the basement. "Where did you find that?" I asked, my voice shaking. My grandmother didn't answer at first. She simply stared at the doll, her face twisted in a mixture of fear and sorrow. Then she spoke in a soft, trembling voice. "I thought I got rid of it years ago." My confusion must have shown on my face, because she sighed and sat down beside me, that doll. "It's been in our family for generations. It was made by my grandmother, but it's never been a normal doll. It's cursed. Every few decades, it finds its way back into the house, and each time it does, something terrible happens." I listened in silence as my grandmother told me the story of the doll. She explained that it had been created by her great-grandmother, a woman who had been obsessed with the idea of bringing a loved one back from the dead. The doll was made as part of a dark ritual, but something went horribly wrong. After that, the doll was said to have a life of its own, moving on its own, laughing and whispering in the dead of night. The doll had caused tragedy after tragedy in their family. It had been responsible for accidents, disappearances, and even deaths. Every time it returned, it brought nothing but suffering, and every time it was always found in the same basement, hidden away for years until someone accidentally stumbled upon it again. I couldn't bear to hear any more. I turned and left the room, the doll's face haunting my every step. That night I made sure to keep my doors locked, and I didn't sleep a wink. I had no idea if it was real or just my overactive imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the doll was waiting for me. To this day, I refuse to go back to my grandmother's house. I don't know where the doll is now, but I fear that, somewhere, it's waiting for its next victim.